The Formed Book Club. Catholic book lovers unpacking good books, chapter by chapter.
Welcome to the Formed Book Club. We're discussing Science of the Doorstep to God by Father Robert Spitzer. We're going to sum up where we left off last session, which was on the 5 desires we have. And I think everyone will agree. No one ever says, I've had enough goodness. I've had enough truth. No matter how much truth you acquire or how much goodness you experience, there's always more that you would appreciate if you had it. So how does he sum this up?
On page 210 in the middle, he sums this up by saying, the important thing to remember is that if the arguments for all 5 transcendentals are valid, meaning we all do in fact desire these things, then God truly is perfect knowledge, perfect love, perfect goodness, justice, perfect beauty, and perfect being, home. And he is present in all these ways to our consciousness. In other words, this is another piece in his argument pointing in the direction that there is a God, and these are the ways we can apprehend that there is a God. And this desire, universal desire for unlimited transcendentals, is another pointer in that direction.
He then goes on to a 4th section called Overcoming Dualism, Quantum Hylomorphism. What does he mean by that? Well, he has shown many different ways that human beings have a soul, a spiritual dimension, which cannot be reduced to the material, to the physical. That raises the question. So now there are 2 dimensions, 2 aspects of human living. We know there's material aspect. We can touch it. We can smell it. We now know there's a spiritual dimension, which can be reduced to the material. So how do they interact? Mm-hmm. Because I do raise my finger by thinking about it. How does my will, which is a spiritual faculty, cause my finger, which is a material part of me, to move? And he is going to propose a theory which has been held by others called quantum hylomorphism.
I found this on the web, for which has been held.
That's Siri. I must have said something which sounded
She's
like
listening.
Somebody's listening.
She's listening.
Well, at least somebody's listening.
No, Father, not somebody, something.
Okay.
Yeah. And behind the something are some somebodies, believe me.
But so in Greek, hule means matter and morphe means form. So the idea that the soul is the form of the body for Aristotle was his hylo material morphism soul.
Okay. Thanks for that explanation.
And what has happened in recent centuries with the growth of the scientific investigation and the success of science in its quantification of reality and measuring quantities is that to think of the soul, the spirit, the mind, thought, love, will as merely material activities, the atoms in the brain, so to speak, interacting. So he's shown it can't be that. There's something more. But then how do they relate? Mm-hmm. And he's going to propose what he calls quantum hylomorphism. On page 213, new paragraph, he says, since dualistic solutions, that is, that have matter and spirit, you've opened the question of how a transmaterial reality like a soul can interact with a material reality, we will have to find an explanation for soul-body interaction. We don't have to find out it. We may not get an explanation. This may be one of those mysteries that we're led up to talking about the doorstep here. We're led to the threshold beyond which all it is, you can't tread here. This is beyond your capacities. Nevertheless, you don't know it's impossible unless you try. And he's going to try as others have tried. He says in page 214, new paragraph, quantum field theory provides a more complete solution to the problem of dualism than that of Aristotle. Well, maybe true. Bottom 215, 3 lines up. If we consider material particles to be excited states of more fundamental quantum fields, as in quantum field theory, so the idea there is that atoms, molecules, quarks, and so on, they are actually manifestations of an underlying reality called the quantum field, of which we know very little, except for the fact that it leads to these manifestations. So if we consider material particles to be excited states of more fundamental quantum fields, by the way, there's always metaphor here, right? What is a field? Mm-hmm. A field is a plot of land that you plow, right? So we talk about particles and fields. There's a danger right there that subatomic reality is not imaginable like a field or a piece or a particle or a bit. So we have to be very careful here. Again, if we consider material particles to be excited states of more fundamental quantum fields and quantum field theory, interacting in space-time, the curvature of which gives rise to gravitational effects, then we could say that the constituents of the physical world are not purely material in the way that early philosophers through the time of Descartes can see them. And that's absolutely true. That is a category error to consider that as you get smaller, 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 it's just particles being divided. No, you get to a point where it's no longer what you really call a particle. That's why they talk about photons being both waves and particles. How do you be a wave and a particle? Mm-hmm. You imaginably you can't do that. But somehow the formulas, which proved correct in the experiments, are such that photons behave like waves and like particles. Mm. But we can't.
Father, can I ask a question?
Well, one thing, we're going to conclude this by saying that, and that's why Richard Feynman famously said, I can say without fear of contradiction that no one understands quantum mechanics. By that he meant, we know the formulas work, we have no idea how that can be. Now go ahead.
Well, yeah, I'm just wondering whether if with this quantum field, it's about things that are not physical, such as waves.
Waves are physical.
No, waves are a measurement of movement, aren't they? I don't know. I mean, yeah.
What is a wave?
Well, no, you can incarnate it by thinking about a wave of sea. That's a physical matter being waved.
It's energy going through something, right? Isn't it? Energy.
The point I'm trying to say here is if we talk about informational fields here and what have you, does physics exist? Or should it be, do physics exist? I mean, it does seem to me that the cosmology, in terms of physics, has sort of basically, not say reduced, has transcended to the level of mathematics and almost pure mathematics. At what point does physics cease to exist?
Well, and we saw previously a physicist saying, well, actually, the world is made up of mathematics. It's all mathematics. And we say, no, it's not, But the deeper you get into particle physics, the more you get into things which cannot be imagined and can only be described by mathematical formula. And therefore the temptation is to say, well, it's all math. Well, It's math, and it's something else besides math, which we experience differently from a mathematical formula. And so that's my criticism here of this theory, is that the previous way of trying to show the relationship between thinking and the brain by reducing thinking to the brain, that is, reducing the spirit to the material, this theory is elevating the material to the spiritual. Mm-hmm. So it's a reductionism too, but it's kind of a reduction above, I would say. And to me, there's several critiques I would make. Number one is you might say that we try to explain how we as spiritual beings can influence matter by will. It's through quantum fields because that's a mathematical aspect of our material reality. But then how does God move things by pure will? He's not a quantum field. He creates quantum fields, but God is not a quantum field. So I think that I think the explanation of quantum dynamics, quantum mechanics, for how thought influences physical actions is a bit like the pineal gland. The pineal gland was a material thing, which Descartes thought was the intermediary between pure thought and pure extension. And here we have the quantum field now becomes intermediary, which is part of us as material beings. So I think it's an interesting attempt, but I think it leads us to say, there's an area here beyond which we are incapable of penetrating in this life.
There's two things I want to one thing I want to ask, one thing I want to say. I'll say the thing I want to say first because I want to ask the question which requires further answering. So I'll say the thing I want to say first. That'll get it out of the way. There's an irony here that rationalism, so the Enlightenment, so called, which turned its back on metaphysics, turned its back on religion, basically began with looking at science and concluding that there's only physics and there's no metaphysics. And here we are 300 years later, where it seems to be concluding there's only metaphysics and there is no physics.
Yes.
So the whole thing is literally flipped, like one of those quantum things, photons or whatever you call them. I don't know, what do you call them? The two things that are connected millions of miles apart.
Is that entangled?
Electrons or whatever.
Electrons, yeah, okay.
Okay, but then my question is basically I'm agreeing with you insofar as I understand what you're saying. But I think what isn't what he's doing is really hinting at that if it's all about information and nothing spiritual, then everything's, well, he used the phrase informed here, further down in that indented quote, quoting someone else, that there's an informer, so to speak, that if there's nothing but form and information, then obviously there has to be an informer. So, in other words, he's just suggesting perhaps that quantum physics, because it's not physics, leads to something which leads towards an understanding of a spiritual reality.
It's like saying, well, what is it after all but a bunch of laws? These are mathematical laws, what they are. Well,
right.
In what do laws inhere?
Right.
Inhere in a mind.
Right. It's kind of like the search for the missing link or something. In evolutionary theory of human development, so we know that there's some kind of interpenetration between the physical, material, and the spiritual. But that's the whole purpose of this book, is to show that there is a spiritual. We're all getting to the point of admitting this again after having spent several hundred years, as you just said, trying to get rid of it and reduce everything to the material. Okay, we've exhausted the possibilities there. Now we're willing to readmit that there's the spiritual. And now we're puzzling over, well, how are these things interpenetrated and connected? And, where's the missing link? Where's the thing that links them together? What is that?
But more than that, Vivian, that the physics has led to the metaphysics. Not that
Yes.
we tried to explain it away and we couldn't, but actually we've in trying to explain it away, we've come to the very thing we try to explain away.
Yes.
I mean, there's a wonderful divine sense of humor going on here somewhere.
Yes. And so, on one hand, it's interesting, it's fascinating, it's to see where these all these brainiacs are going with this stuff. I'm glad I had the opportunity to read this book. I would not have picked up this book if I hadn't been in a study group to read it together. So I'm really glad to see this happening. But as Father is saying, we may simply be at a threshold we're not going to be able to cross. It's like, well, you don't want to discourage people from trying. They might come up with all kinds of interesting things to think about. But at the end of the day, we're dealing with realities that we just might not be able to fully grasp.
But that's raised another question I'd like to ask Father here, because in the past, you could say, well, the reason we can't understand these things is because we can't see them, because we don't have a powerful enough microscope, right? That if we had the means to which to see these things, we could see them, because that's if that's true, we can answer these questions. We just don't have the means to do so yet. Are we at the threshold where the answers being found are asking questions that are not physical, that are now talking in terms of metaphysics? There's a difference. See what I mean? I mean, is it just we can't see an electron yet because we don't have a powerful enough microscope? Or is it that the whole thing now transcends the ability of any physical device, however advanced, ever being able to see it because it can't be seen?
I always say it's both, because when we measure something, we have to have a ruler. We put we measure it, right? We don't change that by measuring it. If I want to see what's in the room, I have to shine a flashlight there. I don't change the wall by shining a flashlight on it very much. I actually do change it somewhat. But if you're going to look inside an atom, how do you look? You have to shine photons in there or electrons, right? Well, now we're talking about you're going to change it by looking at it. So you can't look at it without affecting it. And therefore you can never see it as it is in itself, because you always need to bombard it with something in order to find out what it is.
Okay, now you said that early on about how observing it changes it, but I didn't understand at the time what you meant. Now I understand. You're using atomic particles to see inside of atomic particles. So you're already disrupting.
Exactly.
You're disrupting the little ecosystem that's there, and so that makes sense. I'm so glad this came up.
So you have to use photons to see something, and the photons interact with the electrons.
With the other particles.
That's how we impact.
And that's the famous Heisenberg uncertainty principle, that you can measure the momentum of a particle, but not its position, or its position, but not its momentum, because you're gonna change it by doing what you're doing there.
The other, and I remember saying at that time, or another time in this conversation, about the hidden God and the elusiveness of God and the elusiveness of spirit and these things. And, one of the reasons why I'm glad there very, very well may be a threshold here that can't be crossed is because, let's face it, when man embarks upon trying to understand something, there's often the motivation that he wants to understand it because he wants to control it. He wants to manipulate it. And so I'm reassured that perhaps
there's a very, very good perception there that basically, even in all that we do, we basically impact it by trying to know it. That's great metaphysics. But also, you and me both, Vivian, had the same epiphany moment, I think, where Father's been talking about, you can't observe something because you change it by observing it. We were both thinking, well, that doesn't make any sense. But then you mentioned the magic word photon, that somehow or another, then we have to sort of impose photons upon the electrons in order to actually observe the electron. Then all of a sudden you realize, okay, we can't observe something in a detached way, because we are actually impacting it even by observing it. All of a sudden, I understand that the first time. So praise be to God.
Yes. And now, though, why are we doing this? It's like, and what are we unleashing by being able to do this? I mean, look what happened when we figured out how to break apart an atom. This knowledge turns into power. And so if there are thresholds here, Well, praise God for that. The thresholds that can't be crossed, then praise God for that. Because imagine if we had the ability, look at what we're trying to do with human genetics. We're literally trying to rewrite the genetic codes of human beings at the micro level. And now that ends up, some of these change-ups end up being genetically passed on to progenitors. So you've literally changed the species genetically by doing some of these things.
The power of myth here, because it was mentioned about Edgar Allan Poe and Dostoevsky with respect to illustrating conscience. But I mean, a teenage girl, Mary Shelley, wrote a myth, a story, 200 years ago plus now, about that exact thing, right? That we try to tamper with creation, we create a monster, and then that monster must reproduce. Right, and what's that going to do? That's going to destroy the whole human race. So, do we try to stop that monster from reproducing? I mean, this is the mind of a teenage girl. It's just pretty astonishing.
Well, and the genetic changes. What little I know of this, again, I'm blabbing about things I don't really know that much about, but you'll forgive me, I hope. But it turns out that, okay, so the reason for doing this, let's say, is to cure disease X. If you snip out this part of the genome, you're going to cure this disease over here. Oh, but it turns out that very gene you just snipped out gave that same person a protection against another disease. So, you're going in and you're manipulating something at this micro level, and you're not even fully aware of what the consequences are going to be. So it's a very dangerous thing to be manipulating things at this micro level, which is the foundation of all material reality. And you guys want to play around with this, make this a sandbox?
As the famous wisdom, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing.
Well,
science thinks it has more knowledge than it does. It has little knowledge, and it's a dangerous thing.
The common cold is a species of coronavirus.
That's correct.
What happens if you manipulate coronaviruses? What will happen from that?
Yeah.
We just found out.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
Joseph,
anyway.
you had a two-part question. I answered the first part, and I forget the second part, but I know what the answer is going to be, which I'm going to give now. And this is, God is infinitely greater than we are.
Thank God.
He's mysterious. He could not create something outside of him without it participating in his deep mystery of being. Okay. And we know that all good qualities that we experience exist in God in a much higher form, eminent form, including humor. And I think God is playing hide and seek in this, and not that he's playing a game. He cannot not do this. He can't create us in such a way that he doesn't remain mysterious. So what happens is we think we understand this little world we're in, and then he starts to tell us, well, actually, you're just part of one galaxy. By the way, there's 100 billion of those galaxies out there, and the farther you go, the more you find. And then, by the way, you think you've discovered the universe. And now you realize through your science that you only know 5%. There's 25% more matter than we know about, and 70% more energy. We don't know what it is, but we know it's there. Whoa. That's going out. Then going in, we measure, we get atoms. We get quarks. We get gluons. We get electrons and neutrinos. And then, quantum fields. And then it's random. And we can't know it. We try to measure. We can't catch it. It goes. We now reach the point where we cannot go beyond that, but we know there's something there. I mean, God is saying, wherever you look,
yes,
you're going to find me. You're going to find mystery.
I'm reminded, Father, here of there's a metaphor about the frog not the frog being boiled this time, but the frog at the center of the table. Now, if the frog jumps twice as far each time as the previous time, in no time at all, he gets to the end of the table, almost irrespective of how big the table is. On the other hand, if the frog only leaps half as far as it did the time before, it never gets to the edge of the table, irrespective of how small the table is. And I'm sort of thinking, really, this is talking about God's sense of humor, that physics is both. Right? In terms of our cosmology, right, we keep learning to jump twice as far as the time before and just discover that the table keeps getting bigger. And then as regards this microcosmic understanding of things, quantum physics, every time we try to get smaller and smaller, we understand that we still can't get to the edge of the table. So it's again, Chesterton, as you know, Father, the man who was Thursday, that's the whole metaphor of it, is that God is playing hide and seek with us because he has a sense of humor.
And then the thing that amazes me, back to beauty. So you look at these photographs that are being taken now from the Hubble and the satellites, all these things, even personal telescopes like Brian personal
Tibbetts. Oh my gosh.
And you look at these gorgeous arrays of light and color and whatever is going on, you're just amazed. And then you look at a photograph of one of these like nanoparticles, and it's the same amazing. In fact, you could take the photo of the nanoparticle and tell someone they were looking at a star, they'd hardly know the difference, in that it's the same glorious, amazing, beautiful thing, no matter how tiny you get, no matter how big you get, no matter how far away you get. It's
no.
I mean, now that, having said what I said before about gene cutting and all this kind of stuff, God obviously made us with these intellects that want to know and search for knowledge and search for truth. And so it isn't as though the impetus to want to know is in and of itself not a good thing, and we just want to shut down learning and shut down the seeking of knowledge and all that. But when it turns into, I want to now impose my will on this thing that I now know, that's where it gets tricky, because once you know it, how do you stop that from happening? So this is you can only hope and pray that God
distinguish between the mystical, which is good and supernatural, and the magical, which is our imposition of will upon something.
That's right.
And that's what is evil.
Now, speaking of imposing will, the next section is, do we have free will? And where are we on our time?
I think we should probably
stop here and pick up free will next time.
All right, let's do that. And I'll remind you that the next book we'll be discussing is by Hans von Balthasar, Dare We Hope That All Men Be Saved, a controversial book. We'll look at it not to be controversial, but to see what's he say and is it justified. See you then. God bless you.
If you enjoyed this discussion, please help spread the word about the Forum Book Club by subscribing to the podcast and writing a review. You can sign up for weekly updates at forumedbookclub.ignatius.com.